You hear it everywhere, don't you? Opinions flying like bullets, loud, confident, and usually wrong. Islam is violent. Muslims are brainwashed. It's a religion stuck in the past. And here's the real kicker. Most of the people spouting these views have never even sat down with a Muslim, never opened the Quran, never read a single objective page about Islam. It's astonishing, truly, how much certainty can exist in the vacuum of ignorance. And I'll tell you something as someone who has spent a lifetime digging into tough truths. Ignorance is not harmless. It's not passive, it's a weapon, and in the hands of the lazy and the loud, it's deadly. Now listen carefully, because this matters. We live in an age where convenience has replaced curiosity. If it doesn't fit in a 15-second soundbite, we don't want it. If it's uncomfortable, we scroll past, and if it challenges what we already think we know, we cancel it. But here's a truth you'll never hear from those addicted to outrage. You cannot form a meaningful opinion about something you refuse to understand. You can't claim to stand for justice while clinging to ignorance. It doesn't work like that. Truth requires effort. And effort is in short supply these days. Let me give you an example. I once sat down with a Muslim woman, a doctor, a mother, an activist. I asked her what Islam meant to her. She didn't hesitate. She said, "It means discipline, it means peace, it means service." Not once did she mention hate. Not once did she speak of violence. Yet her neighbors feared her. Why? Because they had been fed a diet of distortion for years. They were educated by headlines instead of humans. And isn't that the real tragedy? We've created a society where it's easier to inherit prejudice than to investigate truth, where we trust memes over meaningful dialogue. And before you shake your head and say, "That's not me," ask yourself, when was the last time you actually sought to learn about Islam? Not through the lens of the nightly news, but from a place of real inquiry. When did you last listen without the intention to argue? If the answer is never, then maybe it's time to admit you've been misinformed, not malicious, necessarily. Just misled, and don't mistake this for some soft, sentimental appeal. This is a call for intellectual courage, because that's what it takes, to look past the noise and say, "I want to know more," to admit that your current view might be incomplete, to do the work. That's bravery in a world that rewards knee-jerk outrage over nuance. And make no mistake, this isn't just about Islam. It's about the principle of fairness. If you demand understanding for yourself, you owe it to others. Now here's the part most won't tell you. Ignorance thrives in silence. It feeds off avoidance. But the second you step into a mosque, speak to a practicing Muslim, or raid beyond the propaganda, you begin to dismantle a lifetime of lazy belief. You begin to see human beings where once you only saw stereotypes, and that's when the fear starts to lose its grip. So here's what I want to say to you, the person who's felt unsure, suspicious, maybe even hostile toward Islam. You're not evil, you're not broken, you're just uninformed, but you don't have to stay that way. You can choose better. You can ask, you can listen, you can learn, but only if you're willing to stop letting ignorance speak louder than truth. Because, in the end, the most dangerous belief is the one that goes unchallenged, and the most powerful shift you'll ever make. That moment when you decide that curiosity matters more than comfort, that's where real growth begins. That's where truth lives. Most people think bravery is about standing tall in the face of a threat, about charging into danger with a sword in hand or speaking loudly when everyone else is silent. But let me tell you something that doesn't get said enough. Real strength, real guts come when you turn the spotlight inward, when you ask yourself a hard question you're not entirely sure you want the answer to. And here's the truth, when it comes to Islam, far too many people are terrified of asking those questions, not because the answers are dangerous, but because they might dismantle years of lazy assumptions. We've become far too comfortable in our echo chambers. We don't ask anymore, we assert. We don't learn, we label. But what happens when you admit you might not have all the facts? What happens when you say, I've made up my mind about Islam, but I've never truly studied it? That takes far more strength than hiding behind second-hand opinions or recycled headlines, and don't mistake that for weakness. It's the opposite. Self-examination is the most intimidating thing a person can do in a world built on performance and pretense. I've interviewed radicals, reformers, presidents, and paupers. I've looked liars in the eye and told the truth when it wasn't fashionable. But the most difficult conversations, the ones where I had to face the possibility that I had gotten it wrong, that maybe, just maybe, I'd let the loudest voices do my thinking for me. And that, my friends, is the first true act of courage. Admitting that ignorance dressed in certainty is still ignorance. Why are we so afraid to ask? Because the question itself threatens our identity. Because we're told that asking about Islam means flirting with danger, or worse, betrayal of our own values. But how absurd is that? You don't lose yourself by learning. You find a fuller version of who you are. You don't become weaker by understanding another world. You become wiser. Asking doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you human, and if you truly believe in your values, then why be afraid of testing them? They should stand tall under scrutiny. There's a man I met in Birmingham, ex-military, proudly British, and by his own admission, raised to be suspicious of Muslims. One day, out of sheer frustration and confusion, he walked into a mosque and asked to speak to the imam. Not to debate, not to argue, just to understand. They talked for 2 hours. He left changed, not converted, not brainwashed, but changed. Why? Because he finally dared to confront the fear. He finally asked, and here's the catch, when you do finally ask, you start to see something remarkable. You see families, not fanatics. You hear stories of generosity, of prayer, of struggle and success. You meet people who wake up at 5 a.m. to bow their heads in submission, not out of fear, but out of devotion. You hear about fasting, not as punishment, but as discipline. You realize slowly and sometimes painfully that the version of Islam you've been sold is not the full picture. It never was. So here's the challenge. Don't be the person who chooses comfort over clarity. Don't be the one who shuts the door because they're afraid of what's on the other side. Ask, not because someone told you to, but because deep down you know the truth can't be found in silence. It's forged in the fire of honest inquiry. Because when you finally step into the unknown, when you confront the questions that have lingered in your mind for years unspoken, unexplored, you're not just learning about a religion. You're proving something far more important, that you are bigger than your bias, braver than your fear, and stronger than the story you've been told. That is what it means to be truly free. Let me put this plainly. You cannot claim to understand the modern world while being willfully ignorant about Islam. You just can't. Not when nearly 2 billion people identify with it. Not when it shapes the daily lives, values, governments, economies, and cultures of entire regions. Not when it influences global conversations about politics, ethics, family, war, and peace. You want to be informed. Then pretending Islam is some distant, irrelevant ideology from the sands of Arabia is not just outdated, it's delusional. And I get it, some people don't want to know. They're comfortable in their little bubbles, content with their caricatures. They think Islam is a monolith, angry men shouting in foreign tongues, women hidden behind veils, regimes ruled by fear. It's easier that way, simplified, sanitized of complexity, but if that's your idea of Islam, then you haven't scratched the surface. You're not educated. You're indoctrinated by stereotypes. I've walked through the streets of Istanbul, heard the call to prayer echo off the rooftops. I've sat down with Muslims in London, Cairo, and Kuala Lumpur. Different cultures, different traditions, but unified by a faith that is far richer and more textured than anything you'd pick up from a newspaper headline. Islam isn't a footnote in the story of civilization. It's one of the chapters that built it. And let's be honest here. Western societies are obsessed with being worldly, multicultural, diverse. We pride ourselves on being open, inclusive, tolerant. Yet somehow, many of those same people who rave about yoga retreats and sushi bars have never even opened a book about the Quran. They claim to love culture, but draw a blank when it comes to understanding the second largest religion on earth. That's not sophistication. That's selective curiosity. You can't speak intelligently about global affairs without understanding the role Islam plays in them. You can't even begin to grasp the intricacies of the Middle East, South Asia, or large parts of Africa without acknowledging Islam's influence on politics, society, and the human spirit. You want to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the refugee crisis, the rise of nationalism, or even the fashion industry in parts of the world. Islam is not just part of the conversation, it is central to it, but the responsibility doesn't fall only on politicians and journalists. It falls on you if you care about truth, if you care about fairness, if you care about being a well-rounded citizen of the world, then ignorance is no longer a luxury you can afford. And let me be clear, learning about Islam doesn't mean agreeing with every aspect of it. It means respecting it enough to stop guessing. It means caring enough to move beyond the lazy headlines and get to the heart of what it really stands for. There's a generation growing up today that has more access to knowledge than ever before in human history. And yet, too many still parrot the same tired nonsense about Islam without ever seeking out a single honest source. That is not progress, that's stagnation wrapped in arrogance, and frankly, it's beneath us. So let me ask you, if you knew your view of nearly a quarter of the world's population was built on half-truths, would you do something about it? Would you have the courage to look again? Because if we truly believe in building a better, more peaceful, more united world, then understanding Islam isn't just helpful, it's non-negotiable. The question isn't whether you'll be touched by Islam in your lifetime. The question is whether you'll choose to face it with intelligence, curiosity, and dignity, or with ignorance dressed up as pride. And that choice, in a world this interconnected, will define whether you're part of the solution or just another voice lost in the noise. Let me hit you with something you might not expect. Some of the most disciplined, calm, purpose-driven people I've ever met in my life have been devout Muslims. And no, not because they were forced to follow some rigid code, not because they were brainwashed, silenced, or shackled by fear, but because they chose to live by a set of principles that, while deeply spiritual, are also shockingly practical. And if you've ever looked around this chaotic, screen-drenched, attention-starved modern world and wondered where all the peace went, maybe, just maybe, you've been looking in the wrong places. We've become obsessed with chasing happiness, chasing success, chasing dopamine. We scroll, we binge, we brag. And somehow, despite all the options, we feel more lost than ever, more disconnected, more empty. Why? Because in a world drowning in distraction, very few people are anchored in anything, and that's where Islam caught my attention. Because here is a faith that doesn't just give you belief, it gives you structure, a roadmap, a rhythm to life that's not built around algorithms or instant gratification, but around purpose, reflection, and self-restraint. Imagine stopping everything 5 times a day, 5 moments deliberately carved out of your schedule, not to post, not to check your feed, but to step away from the noise and realign your soul with something bigger than you, not for performance, not for applause, but for clarity. That's prayer in Islam. That's submission, not in the way the West caricatures it, but submission as a conscious decision to rise above impulse. And when you actually take the time to understand it, it doesn't look weak. It looks like willpower in its purest form. And then there's fasting, not just skipping food to drop a few pounds before summer. No, fasting in Islam is about mastering the self. Going without to grow within, abstaining not just from food, but from gossip, from anger, from selfishness. It's a recalibration of your entire being, and tell me, in an age where we are slaves to our appetites, who's really free? The one who consumes without restraint, or the one who can say no? Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable for some, because when you realize that Islam is not just about rituals, but about radical accountability, suddenly, the lazy stereotypes start to fall apart. Islam asks you to take responsibility for your time, for your money, for your words. There's a built-in system of charity called zakat that isn't a suggestion, it's an obligation. Because in Islam, success isn't defined by how much you accumulate, but how much you serve. You start to see why this faith resonates so deeply with people who feel lost in the modern world. It offers what so many are searching for: stability, values, boundaries, meaning, not imposed through fear, but embraced through understanding. It's a system that demands discipline, yes, but also delivers inner peace. And no, it's not perfect. No religion, no ideology, no philosophy is. But the idea that it's all backwards or barbaric, that's not just ignorant. It's insulting to the millions who live it with grace and integrity every day. So let's be brutally honest. The Western world is having a crisis of meaning. Mental health issues are soaring. Loneliness is epidemic. Attention spans are shot. And here's Islam quietly offering an alternative. Not a trend, not a self-help gimmick, but a deeply rooted, time-tested path that has guided people through centuries of chaos and change. Maybe it's time we stop mocking what we don't understand and start learning from it instead. Because if you can't respect a system that teaches self-restraint, generosity, mindfulness, and purpose, maybe the problem isn't with the system. Maybe it's with what we've come to call normal. Here's a question that hits right at the core. What if the very thing you've been warned about your entire life is the one thing that could bring you clarity? What if the religion you've been conditioned to fear or dismiss or ignore, Islam, isn't a threat to your identity, but a mirror to it? Not something to run from, but something to understand deeply and honestly. Because the truth, raw, unfiltered, and often uncomfortable, is this: the fear of Islam in the West isn't born from experience. It's born from ignorance, and ignorance has a nasty habit of turning fiction into fact. People don't reject what they understand. They reject what they've been told to fear. They reject what hasn't been explained, what hasn't been shown, what hasn't been humanized. And Islam, for far too long, has been cast in the shadow of suspicion, misrepresented by extremists, manipulated by the media, misunderstood by millions. And yet, when you cut through the static, when you get face to face with real people, real stories, real belief, you see something that shatters the narrative entirely. I sat down with a Muslim man once, a father of 4, taxi driver by trade, philosopher at heart. He said to me, "Islam taught me how to be a better man, not how to control others, not how to hate, not how to judge, but how to be better, a better husband, a better listener, a better human being." And you know what? I believed him, because it wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't performance, it was lived truth. And that moment stuck with me. We talk so much in the West about being open-minded, about freedom, about tolerance. But where is that tolerance when it comes to Muslims? Where is the open-mindedness when it comes to learning about their actual lives, their real faith, beyond the headlines and hysteria? It's nowhere. We preach diversity, but practice double standards. We claim to embrace difference, but only if it fits neatly within our comfort zone. It's easy to sit on your sofa and pass judgment. Easy to parrot what you've heard in the pub or on talk radio. They're all the same. They don't want to integrate. Their values aren't our values. But have you ever actually spoken to someone living this faith with dignity? Have you asked them what they believe, what drives them, what Islam asterisk really asterisk means to them? Because if you haven't, then all you've got is noise, and noise is not knowledge. Islam, at its core, is not about world domination or forced submission, or whatever absurd myths have been floated around by those who have never opened the Quran. It's about accountability, about worship, about self-discipline. It's about community, charity, family. It's about waking up every day with a sense of duty, not just to God, but to your fellow human beings. And I'll tell you something else. It's not exclusive. It doesn't claim monopoly on truth. In fact, Islam openly recognizes the prophets of Judaism and Christianity. That alone should tell you it's not here to erase the world. It's here to add to it. But to know that, you'd have to actually look. You'd have to step away from the drama and toward the depth. You'd have to unlearn the propaganda and relearn the people. That takes effort. That takes humility. And in today's world, that might just be the rarest form of bravery. So here's the final challenge. Stop letting other people tell you what to think, especially about something as significant, as nuanced, and as influential as Islam. Don't take the shortcut of fear. Take the high road of understanding, not for political correctness. Not for show, but because the truth, when you finally see it, has a way of shaking you awake. And once you're awake, you'll never see the world the same way again. Let me ask you something directly. How long are we going to allow a handful of extremists to define an entire religion for nearly 2 billion people? How long are we going to sit back, arms folded, minds closed, and say, well, if that's what they do, then I want nothing to do with it? Because here's the hard, uncomfortable truth. If your understanding of Islam is based solely on what terrorists have done in its name, then you've fallen for the lie. You've bought into a version of reality crafted by the very people who want fear to spread faster than facts. It's astonishing how easily we let the worst representatives of a group become the face of the whole. Imagine judging Christianity solely by the Crusades or the Westboro Baptist Church. Imagine defining Judaism only by its most radical fringes. You'd be called ridiculous, rightly so, and yet, when it comes to Islam, we allow this distorted logic to thrive. We turn on the news, we see a bomb go off, we hear a shout in Arabic, and suddenly, 9 billion Muslims are guilty by association. It's lazy, it's dangerous, and it's wrong. I've spent time with Muslims from every walk of life. Lawyers, teachers, soldiers, mothers, students. People who pray 5 times a day, and people who barely pray at all. People who fast, who give to charity, who serve their communities. And I can tell you with no hesitation, the Islam they live, breathe, and believe in is a world apart from the warped version plastered across television screens whenever violence erupts. Their Islam is built on peace, not provocation, on discipline, not destruction, on submission to God, not domination over others. Now some of you might scoff. You might say, well, if that's true, why don't they speak out? And to that I say, open your ears. They do, constantly, but the problem isn't their silence, it's our selective hearing. When a Muslim condemns terrorism, it's dismissed as damage control. When a mosque denounces extremism, it barely makes the local paper. But let one lunatic strap on a suicide vest, and the whole world watches in horror, confirming every bias we're too lazy to confront. This is not a defense of terrorists, let me be crystal clear. Extremism in any form, whether it wears a cross, a crescent, or carries no faith at all, is a disease. It deserves to be exposed, condemned, and defeated. But confusing extremism with the entire faith of Islam is not just intellectually dishonest, it's morally bankrupt. It's the kind of thinking that leads to children being bullied in schools because of their names, to women being spat on in the streets for wearing a hijab. To families being told they don't belong in the very countries they've helped build, the extremists want division. They feed on our fear. They hope will continue to confuse their twisted ideology with genuine belief. Because the more we fear Islam, the easier it is for them to sell their poison as truth. So ask yourself, whose narrative are you reinforcing when you say, Islam is the problem? Whose side are you really on when you let your fear silence your reason? If we're going to defeat extremism, we can't do it by demonizing an entire religion. We do it by standing with the vast, overwhelming majority of Muslims who want nothing to do with violence, who raise their children with values of compassion, faith, and service, who cry when their faith is dragged through the mud by murderers pretending to be martyrs. So I say this: stop letting the worst among them speak for the best. Stop letting fear write the story. The world doesn't need more division. It needs more people willing to see the difference between a faith and its most fanatical fringe. And if you can't tell that difference, then maybe it's not Islam that needs examination. It's your willingness to see past the smoke.